I'm Bob Kuebler with Mentor Force, and this is my good friend Mike. And we're out here in the woods, and we're just going to talk, I think, about how to get close to God or something like that today. So, Mike, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Bob.
So,
Thanks for the invite.
well, thanks for being here. This is a cool place. I call it Vision Falls because I came here once because God had given me a vision, and on my way to finding the vision, I stopped here before He showed me the complete vision. But that's a story of another time. We're like, lately been talking a lot about how do you get close to God? How do you know God more? What are the things that you do that bring you into a deeper relationship with God in a world that is really desperately trying to keep you away from God? So, what do you do to get closer to God? What works for you?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is when was the first time I felt close to God? The very first time I felt close to God, I was about 15 years old at a Catholic church where for the first time in my life, I had seen a worship team up in front of a congregation with acoustic guitars and tambourines and a keyboard, and they were singing songs and hymns, and for the first time in a long time, I decided I was going to sing along. And as I began to sing, I felt the Lord touch me. And it was the first time I had ever felt something that strong and intimate that was initiated by God. And so time goes by, I get into my years of gallivanting around and singing, etc., and I get invited to a church service by my soon-to-be wife, and I fought tooth and nail not to go, and finally relented and said, okay, I'll go. And so I went to that church service, and at the point where the minister said his sermon, and he talked about the 3 points, can we pause this?
We're pausing this. We'll edit it.
The righteousness of Christ, the judgment of God, and what awaits you without that righteousness. And so I had been a student of the Word in some degree growing up because I couldn't sleep well at night. So I had a New Testament on my nightstand, and I would read that before I'd eventually fall asleep. And reading the scriptures would help me relax and get sleepy. And so what he was saying rang true with me. I know that's in the Bible. I know that's in the Bible, etc., etc. And then he talked to me about my sin. And I realized then, for the first time, just how desperate a person I was for God and what my eternity was going to be like without him. So I cried out to God, and God saw me right there in that spot, and he came to me in the most, still in my life, still the most powerful moment I have ever experienced. The infilling of God into my life and the washing away of my sin. So I felt extremely close and blessed at that moment, and then I decided to pursue that. And so I asked Debbie, my wife Debbie, where could I go buy a good Bible? I didn't know. So went out and got a good Bible and started reading and studying and diving into God's Word, and that produced something in me that only God can produce. It's his the knowledge of him, the worship of him, the understanding of him, and feeling the love of God with me whenever I got into his Word has kept me on that path my whole life. I need to read his Word. I need to be close to him every day. I need to call out to him and ask him to help me and guide me and correct me. So that was the beginning for me.
Wow, that is awesome. So you got invited, you were touched, your wife helped in the process, and you just had a hunger. When we study Jesus broke bread, Jesus got broken, we get broken. You know what it's like to be broken. And lately I've been studying like the brokenness, and in my own life, God revealed to me that through brokenness, you're given a greater capacity to love. And it seems like when Jesus broke things, something got broken for a greater purpose, or almost like a pregnant construction. So picture something getting broken, but it's like the brokenness created an enlargement, so to speak, for a greater purpose. And then the result was a greater prosperity, because when they collected loaves that were broken and given away, more were returned than we had in the first place. So your brokenness, what does brokenness mean to you? Does it get you closer to God when something breaks?
When you say the word broken, the first thing I think of is death and life. In other words, the principle of resurrection. Let something die, or let it happen. If it's something that's got to be taken away from you in your life because it's going to improve your circumstances or make you a better person, let it happen so that God can bring a resurrection in you. Much as Abraham had to lay down his Isaac in order to receive him back from the dead, we need to give up things in our lives and allow a brokenness to occur deep down in our soul so that God can repair that or give new life to that place and cause something sweet to grow in its place. With his hand in there, nothing but good can come. If we choose our own path, it's usually corrupt. So with that corruption comes something else that has to die.
Wow. I know in my life, and probably the most brokenness of my life was on a Sunday night at the Tabernacle in Orchard Park, and I was wasted away, had tears in my eyes, and at the point where it was going back into worship after the main service, I had tears in my eyes. I had my hands in front of me like this, and as I closed my eyes, my hands in my mind's eye, or my spirit man, became broken in two. So I saw the two halves of my heart literally broken in two. But at that point, what I saw was Jesus holding a baby boy, and they both smiled. The baby boy was like Middle Eastern complexion and hair, 8 to 10 months old. They both smiled briefly and then disappeared. What happened at that point, a golden healing oil began to be poured into between the chasm of the two broken halves of heart. And that's where they stayed. And that was the end of the vision. And I was still broken, but I went home, and the next day I'm asking God, and I say, okay, God, you gave me this beautiful vision. You gave me this, wow, it just blew me away. What does it mean? And the message was, through brokenness, you're given a greater capacity to love. Because my heart had been broken in two, my heart didn't go back to this size. My heart stayed like this with that golden healing oil, became almost like an amber colored, like a honey, like a bee's honey. And it just almost like held the two pieces together. My heart was bigger. And so I think some people think that once you get to know God, that things become easier. And it's like, when you get closer, is it easier?
Not necessarily, no. You know, speaking to that brokenness, almost 2 years ago now, I lost my son Christian. At age 34, he died at home. And so what's happened to me is I've suffered the most deep injury, brokenness, grief I ever thought I could ever experience and live to tell about it. It's just such a crushing, deep down in my soul. It's, you know, it's still being healed. Debbie and I have started to go to a ministry called Grief Share, because here we are almost 2 years in and we're still crushed by it all. But what I did notice is that because of that crushing, for example, you could look at a grain of wheat, a grape. There's other things in this world, but they need to be crushed in order for something new and nourishing to come out of that. And what's happened with me is, before, my emotions were always deep down under the surface, and it would take a lot to bring that out. I was more of a stoic, maybe a hard-nosed guy with some things, but now when I'm conversing with people who have suffered great loss, my emotions are just below the surface. And I notice now that my empathy, my sympathy, my considering their state is so much more alive and sensitive to what they're going through because of my own loss, that I believe God's made me into a new man.